How are you seeing things over the last couple of years, mate? Did you see a pandemic last year?
Let me start from the beginning. So in 2019, I had a family come and see me who had lost a loved one, and they had lost a loved one in the neighbouring borough of Northampton. So they asked me to go to Northampton and collect their loved one, and they complained at the time that the hospital wouldn't let them see that loved one. So I went to the Northampton hospital and kind of collected their loved one. And while I was there, I asked the guys there in the mortuary, why wouldn't you let this family see their loved one? And they opened the chapel doors or the viewing room doors, and there was a great big inflatable kind of blow up pandemic mortuary. I've since found out it is, and they told me there was something really horrible coming, and this is why, because the viewing room was being used by this bit of kit, and that was my kind of introduction to COVID, and that was back in end of November, beginning of December 2019. So Christmas
So,
came
so
and the
they
new,
they already had this temporary morgue and knew something terrible was coming in November 2019.
yeah, yeah, that I saw it firsthand and was told that based on the story that I've just told you, kind of thing.
Okay.
So the news broke just after Christmas, and we were all told about a Chinese lab and the Wuhan wet market that'd been there for hundreds of years without an issue that suddenly was an issue. Um, uh, the hysteria was mounting, and it wasn't long into 2020 before I was contacted by the local BBC. And they asked, they knew that I was a funeral director, and they asked to come out and do a report around COVID. And I'd hasten to add, at this time, early on in the process, I believed COVID exactly the same as everyone else. I was convinced it was real. We were being told it was real. And you have to remember that if I go to a hospital and, for example, they tell me a deceased is HIV or, for example, is tuberculosis, then obviously that's something I would take very serious, and COVID was no exception. So I was kind of trying to be as careful as I possibly could. The BBC came, they brought a cameraman and a lady that spoke to me. They briefed me very intently on what they were going to ask me and told me the answers they wanted. And they asked me to dress up in full PPE, and I was a bit reluctant at the time because, I mean, all funeral directors will use aprons and obviously gloves, but masks and stuff like that is not something we would usually use. I worked for the coroner for 7 years, and the only time I would ever use a mask there is if I was attending the scene of a death where that deceased had perhaps been there for a while, an undiscovered death, and then you put Vicks on the mask, and the idea is just to keep the smell away. It's not going to protect you against anything, least of all a virus. So they got the interview they wanted, and promoted the hysteria. And I kind of kick myself now because it's simply not true. Any of it is not true. So